Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to this week's installment of Black Belt Leadership, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Now, the name Marihi Ushiba may not mean much to you unless you're a martial arts practitioner, and if you are, you recognize and you appreciate the name for the art that Ushiba brought to the martial arts community. Now, as a young boy, Marihi Ushiba witnessed a group of local thugs that were mercilessly beating his father for political reasons. Now, wanting to avenge his father's beating, but not knowing how, Ushiba thrust himself into the world of Budo and began training in multiple martial arts. Over the period of several years, he mastered the arts of jujitsu, fencing, and spear fighting. But along the way, he also began to engage in very devout religious training, and all of a sudden, he found his martial arts training focused on combat was at odds with his religious training that focused on peace and harmony. So Ushiba sought a way to reconcile the two and to be able to create an art that could still be used to defend oneself without being a combat art. Ultimately, Ushiba founded what today we call Aikido in the 1920s. Now, from the technical aspect, he grew upon his training in Daito-Ryu, or what today we would commonly call Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, and he blended that with sword and spear fighting techniques. What he simply did was he took the footwork and the body movements from sword and spear fighting, and he incorporated with that the joint locks, the joint manipulations, and the throws from jiu-jitsu. And he ultimately created a system that was focused not on opposing force, but redirecting force. Now, in the world of martial arts, this introduced a new means of self defense that was in direct opposition to what was taught by traditional karate or jiu-jitsu instructors of the day. The traditional karate and jiu-jitsu instructors focused more on meeting force with force. Now, Ushiba believed that it was important not to defeat an opponent, but find a way to remove conflict and create a peaceful world, giving an opponent an opportunity to yield and to submit. So rather than meeting force with force, Ushiba taught Aikido practitioners to yield to the force of their opponent and ultimately use it against them. Now, many in the martial arts community today refer to Aikido as the gentle art or the soft art because of its emphasis on redirection of force so the opponent's energy can be used against him or her. So, Aikido focuses what I refer to as the power of surrender. Now, most martial arts practitioners today still do not consider Aikido a combat sport, but they see it more as a means of self defense and self preservation. If you've ever had an opportunity to see Aikido being demonstrated, it is a free flowing and beautiful art to watch. It is almost dance in motion. But as you watch it, the self defense aspects of Aikido can't be overlooked, they can't be ignored, and they are self evident. Remember, Aikido has its origins in Jiu-Jitsu, and as a result of that, Aikido possesses several techniques that can cause serious harm to an opponent who refuses to yield. Now, Takayuki Kubota, affectionately known as Tak Kubota, was the founder of Gosoku Ryu, but he was also an Aikido practitioner. I've had the privilege before his death of calling him not just an instructor, but a friend. Now, Tak Kubota often described Aikido as the art of unintentional cooperation. He would stress the importance of yielding to an opponent's aggression rather than countering it directly, as he taught in Gosoku Ryu. To Tak Kubota and to other Aikido practitioners, it wasn't about confrontation, it was about surrender. The deceptive nature of Aikido itself is what makes this martial arts so unique. Now, it's important to understand from a martial arts perspective, Aikido, like Jiu-Jitsu and like Judo, relies heavily on unbalancing an opponent and using their own body against them. It takes advantage of what today we refer to as the law of inertia, Newton's first law of motion, which says an object in motion will remain in motion until acted upon by an outside force. So Aikido takes advantage of an opponent's motion and it uses that motion to either redirect or unbalance them in some way to move the opponent in the direction the practitioner wants them to go. So the goal was to seek the surrender of the opponent and to end the confrontation peacefully. However, if the assailant chose not to surrender and wanted to continue the fight, remember the joint locking and the joint manipulation elements of Aikido could cause significant harm and could leave an individual injured or maimed for life. Now, some common practitioners of martial arts you may have seen or may know about would include American actor Steven Seagal. He is a seventh Dan in the art of Aikido. And while adapted for the big screen, many of the elements of traditional martial arts, traditional Aikido, are very evident in his films. And if you're a fan of the Doctor Who series, many of you know that the Doctor learned the art of what he referred to as Venusian Aikido at a dojo on planet Venus. And he used this art in the comics, in radio, and in television to defeat his opponents again by using his own attacker's momentum and movement against him. So I guess it appears that the art of surrender is not just limited to planet Earth. But if we go back in history and we look at some of the great generals of the past and we study military conflict, we see these very same elements of Aikido used in combat. We have only to examine military greats like Hannibal, like Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and even Frederick the Great. All four of these individuals effectively used their opponent's tactics against them in battle. It was their unique understanding of warfare and the strategies their enemies were going to employ that allowed these brilliant generals to create a counter strategy and use the opponent's momentum against them as an advantage. Now, one of the ways that we would see this is these military geniuses would often yield. They would surrender ground to an opposing army, luring them into a strategic position that their own armies could then exploit, and that led to a decisive victory. They well understood the timeless wisdom of Sun Tzu, who famously said, "All warfare is based in deception." Now, in one particular battle, Julius Caesar aligned his troops in battle formation to face what appeared to be an overwhelming enemy. But because Julius Caesar knew the tactics that this general was going to employ as the opposing forces attacked, Caesar intentionally had one section of his front guard begin to intentionally fall back, yielding to the pressure of the attacking force. The opposing general saw this as an opportunity to move more troops into that area, and as the opposing troops pushed forward, what the opposing general didn't realize is that Caesar was using this moment to move troops from the edges that aligned his troops in the way that they were aligned to encircle the opponents, not only in front, but to the sides and to behind. Now, today, this is known as a pincer movement, and it's a military tactic that is still used widely to gain a tactical advantage over an enemy. Again, another strategic use of the power of surrender. Now, we also see the power of surrender in the art of sailing. Let me give you an example of where that actually can be seen. I was recently traveling to Tampa and St. Petersburg, where I had done a series of talks and keynoting some events and then done some training with some local clients in the area. And while I was on a break from some elements of training and the opportunity to have a break between speaking venues, I traveled to one of my favorite places in that St. Petersburg, and I went down to the pier to eat at one of my favorite restaurants. And after I had a great dinner, I decided I was going to walk around and just enjoy the sights of the pier and the freshness of the breeze blowing in from the bay and just spend some time walking and relaxing. But as I walked along the pier, I paused to observe a group of young sailors getting ready to launch their boats during a very windy day. Now, I found it curious, and I wondered how these young men were going to get these little small sailboats out of the harbor and into the bay, because on that day there was a very stiff wind blowing in from the bay. how they were going to get these small boats out into the open ocean and fight that strong wind, I found curious. So I thought I would watch. And what I saw was amazing. These young men jumped in their boats, they hoisted their sails, and they began zigzagging their way out of the harbor and into the bay. Now, I found this fascinating to watch this process because rather than fight the wind, which was going to be a losing proposition, what did they do? They surrendered to the power of the wind and they used it to their advantage. It was essentially Aikido in motion. By harnessing the power of the wind, they were able to move the sail back and forth. And as they did so, they were cutting a zigzag pattern as they exited the harbor. They were redirecting the power of the wind to move their boats forward, even though they were sailing against the wind. You know, I did a little research after I got home, and here's what I learned. Sailors throughout history have harnessed the power of the wind in a similar manner to move their ships across great distances. By understanding when and how to surrender to the wind's power, these sailors were able to channel the awesome energy of the wind to their advantage without having to fight, and they were able to move forward even when the wind was in their face. Now, there's a lesson to be learned here about the power of surrender, and that's where I want to lean in and spend just a few moments. Understand this, and if you've lived for any period of time, you know this statement to be true. Life is always changing. Every day, life is relentlessly moving forward, whether we like it or not. And what got us to where we find ourselves today isn't going to get us to where we want or need to be tomorrow. That's going to require that we change. And at times, because life is always changing, we can also feel the pressures of life as you and I battle obstacles, challenges, and setbacks. So we've got a choice. We can either fight against the change and fight against the pressure, or we can yield to the change and yield to the pressure. And like these young sailors, we can use it to our advantage. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you there is great power in surrender. You know, the Ocoee River, if you've never been there, is an incredible place if you're a whitewater enthusiast. It is a dam-controlled whitewater experience. Now, the upper Ocoee was the site of the 1996 whitewater slalom competition. It is known for its thrilling Class 4 rapids. And while I was there visiting with my middle son, Jordan, we had an opportunity to watch some elite athletes as they challenge these Class 4 rapids. And it was truly an amazing experience to watch. Now, he and I weren't there to do the Class 4 rapids. We're not that adventurous, but we were there to whitewater raft the middle section of the Ocoee, because there it offers some Class 3 and some Class 2 rapid opportunities with some Class 1 and Class 2 rapids in the middle. And because of that, it attracts whitewater enthusiasts from all around the world to enjoy this amazing thrill ride that is really first class, because with dam-controlled whitewater, you really get the same experience every time you show up. So I took my son Jordan and we decided that we were going to do the Middle Ocoee River. Now, Chattanooga, Tennessee is a beautiful place with a gorgeous history. And when we got there, we were paired up with some other people and we were given a guide who was an incredible experienced navigator and really a friendly, great guy to have a conversation with. And that individual, whose name escapes me, made our experience not only just memorable, but a lot of fun. And one particular event in particular taught me the power of surrender. Now, the raft that we were in, and my son and I, and the team that were all rafting down the Ocoee, had just navigated a 3+ section of the river. It was quite challenging, and our guide asked us if we were ready for a break. Well, no sooner had we spoken that we were, he smiled and then unexpectedly rocked the boat. And when he did, myself, my son, and several others ended up being spilled into the cold, brisk, fast-moving water. Now, it was a Class 1. It was not fast-moving water, but it was moving nonetheless. So we got in the water and had an opportunity to cool off and simply relax a minute and enjoy the beauty of this pristine river location. And when we got in the water, he told us, hey guys, just lay back, point your feet downriver, allow your flotation device to hold you up, and simply relax and let the water carry you downstream. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The fast moving current began to carry us down this smooth section of the river as the guide kept the raft moving in the same general direction. The folks that didn't get tossed in the water worked along with him to keep us in the general direction of the boat. And after a few minutes of floating, the guide began to call us all back into the raft before we got to the next section of rapids, another class 3. Now, my son and a handful of other rafters had remained close to the raft, and using a rope, he one by one pulled them back into the raft, and they all climbed back aboard. Now, I'd ventured a little further out than everybody else in the raft because the guide had asked me to go retrieve an oar that one of the rafters had dropped when he rocked the boat, and we all fell out. So I found myself further away than the guide's rope could reach. So when the guide called out, I turned to try to swim back upstream to get to the raft. And it was in that moment that I experienced the power of the current as it continued to push me downriver. Now, try as I might, and I was in good shape, but as hard as I swam, I couldn't overcome the water's relentless push, and I continued to drift towards the next section of rapids. So after a few minutes of hard swimming, guess what? I began to get tired. And as I began to get tired, I began to move even faster towards the next section of the rapids. Well, in response to that, my guide called out, John, swim sideways. Go to the shore and stop fighting the water. Now, this was something he told us earlier, and in my effort to obey his instructions, I had forgotten what he told us to do. He said if we find ourselves in the middle of the water, don't fight the current. Instead, surrender to the current, yield to the push of the water, and swim towards the shoreline. The current will push us faster and will get us to the shoreline quicker without significant effort. He'd also taught us varying paddling strokes to navigate the rapids, and as well as how to use the river's currents to steer and control the raft. But in this moment, what was important to me was getting out of the deep water and into the shallow water where I could touch bottom. So I did what he told me to do. Rather than fighting the current, I began to swim to the side and let the current take me towards the edge of the shore. And as the water got shallower, as our navigator had told us, the power of the current began to diminish. And once my feet could touch the bottom of the river, it was a simple task at that point to simply put my feet on the ground, lean up against the current, and wait for the raft to catch up to me and pass me. And then I could use the current to swim back towards the raft and climb in to enjoy the next class 3 that was to come. So for me, in that moment, my choice was very simple. I could fight the current, or I could yield to the current, and I could harness the current to my advantage. This is an example of the power of surrender. In that moment, it was Aikido, whitewater style. So how do we apply the power of surrender and harness it to our advantage, especially when it comes to personal growth and professional development in our lives? Well, first, we must accept the fact that change is inevitable. Life is going to bring us change whether we like it or not. So we can either fight it or we can surrender to it. Now, success, by definition, is to cease to resist. And when we cease to resist change, we can accept it as necessary for growth. When we cease to resist change, we can embrace change as an opportunity to learn and grow. And in doing so, we can harness the power of change and allow it to transform our lives and to make us a better version of who we are and what we do. Now, the second thing we've got to do to embrace the power of surrender is we've got to be willing to release control and embrace the unknown. You know, all too often we try to control the outcome to bring about the outcome that we desire. Sometimes life wants to take us in a different direction than we anticipated to actually bring about a better outcome than maybe we realized that was available on our own. So when we release control of the outcome, we embrace the process of change. Why is that important? Because when we embrace the process of change, we know that in the end, it's going to stretch us, it's going to grow us, and it's going to allow us, as I've already said, to become a better version of who we are and what we do. It's transformation taking place in our lives. Because when we stop trying to control the outcome, we also release the stress and the anxiety that comes with trying to control the outcome, and it frees our minds to fully learn the lesson that life is trying to teach us. Now, the third thing that we need to understand in terms of a benefit is this. When we stop fighting against the challenges, the obstacles, and the setbacks that life is going to bring our way from time to time, we're going to open the door and open our mind to new possibilities. Because when we surrender, we create space in our thinking for new ideas, new solutions, and new opportunities to be created and to arise. Creativity and innovation flow when we let go and we surrender. And as a result of that, that creativity and that innovation can lead us to discover breakthroughs we hadn't previously considered or pursued. Look at some of the most inventive creators in history, and you'll see this to be true in their lives. And the last benefit that I want to point out by embracing the power of surrender is this. When we embrace the power of surrender, it fosters a greater sense of self-awareness and humility in our lives. Because when we stop confronting challenges and we stop pushing back and fighting against change, we release our attachment to the outcomes and we begin to embrace these moments as teachable moments. Now, when we are open to be taught the lesson life is going to teach us, we can look within and we can check our motives, we can let go of our ego, and we can gain a deeper understanding of who we are and our place and our purpose in the earth. Remember, Aikido is called the art of unintentional cooperation for a reason. Life is going to continue to bring us a series of challenges, obstacles, and setbacks, even as it brings us perpetual change. And there are going to be times in our life when it feels like the challenges, the obstacles, and the setbacks are going to be relentless. It's like that push of the water in the Ocoee constantly forcing you downstream, whether you want to go or not. So again, we've got a choice. We can confront all of this relentless pressure in our own strength, and maybe for a season, we can hold ourselves at bay. But at some point, we're going to be tired if we fight in our own strength. And if you fight too hard against the water and you tire, there's odds that you could drown and never recover. But the power of surrender shows us a different way. By yielding to the challenge, by yielding to the obstacles, by yielding to the setbacks of life, guess what? You and I can redirect those forces that are seeking our destruction, seeking to hold us back from moving forward, and we can use their energy to our advantage. Just like the sailor who harnessed the sail and harnessed the wind, you and I can use the power of challenges, obstacles, and setback and change to propel us forward to an even greater destiny than perhaps we envisioned. And we can do that even when we find ourselves sailing against the wind. You know, it's often said, and you've heard me say it before on the podcast, that setbacks are set up in disguise. Now, rightly used, a setback can teach us valuable lessons. It can help us identify areas of needed improvement in our lives, and it can ultimately contribute to our personal and professional growth. But again, only if rightly used. And if rightly used, a setback can provide us with an opportunity to reevaluate our goals, to adapt our strategies, or maybe, just maybe, even discover a new path forward we haven't considered that could take us to a place we hadn't even envisioned going, that could be bigger, greater, and more amazing than what we've experienced or considered up till now. When we yield, you and I, we can use the power of surrender to propel ourselves forward. Remember, surrender, like Aikido, is the art of ceasing to resist. It requires less energy and it requires less effort. And at the end of the day, it's going to end the conflict in a peaceful and in a productive way. Now, there is a time to fight. Don't get me wrong. There is a time to fight. And when we need to fight with everything in us. But there's also a time not to fight. And often we find ourselves fighting when we should be yielding. Now, wisdom is knowing the difference between when to fight and when not to fight and acting accordingly. Black belt leaders understand a very simple principle. Sometimes when life hands you a lemon, you make lemonade. That is the power of surrender. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt leader, and I want to say thanks for joining me and have a great day.